Oh, yeah, that's a good thing, huh? All right, ladies and gentlemen, Roxy, this is for you. Enjoy. All right, so we're going to go over the questions on the study guide, and you guys feel free to interrupt me if we have questions as we go through. So the first question says, kind of question 1, 2, and 3 actually all go together. I don't know why we have them on there so many times. Does Congress represent everyday Americans demographically? What kind of demographic patterns exist? And the difference in descriptive and substantive representation. What all of that is getting at is that Congress is the most representative part of our government. There are more women there than there have been in the executive branch, obviously, because we haven't had a female president. There's more ethnic diversity. There's more socioeconomic diversity. There's more religious diversity. And yet they still don't look just like us. And so one of the questions always comes down in terms of representation. Descriptive representation would be people who look like us. So if you, say, have a congressional district where you have a large group of Muslims, then descriptive representation would say that you would have to have a Muslim to represent them. If you have an area where you have a large proportion of people who are working class, then you would say you would have to have a working class person to represent them. Substantive says that a person who is college educated can represent a working class person, or a man can represent a woman if they can understand their particular plight, their particular problems. Because the reality is demographically things affect us all differently. So descriptive, they look like us. And truth be told, Congress looks more like us today than it ever has. But substantively, they certainly can still represent us, or in my mind they can. I guess those are just kind of perspectives. You know what we should go ahead and add to that? Let's go through the 3 different kinds of attitudes that a member can take when they're representing us. So I remember hearing this story actually when I was your age, back before we had email, about a member of Congress who represented my state, and they said what he would do is he would actually take the letters that he got in favor of something and then the letters he got against something, and he would stack them up. And whichever stack was higher, that would dictate how he voted. If he does that, he has a delegate theory of representation. He says, I am simply there to represent you, and that's what you wanted, so I'm going to go with public opinion. Somebody that takes a trustee perspective means that you've trusted me. And it's kind of more what the framers thought. The framers felt like the people that we were electing should be a little bit more removed from public opinion sometimes. Not that they shouldn't care about what we thought, but the decisions that they make should be a little bit more wise, a little bit more educated. So a trustee doesn't necessarily go with public opinion. That doesn't mean they fly in the face of it. It just means that they're using their wisdom and their discernment to make the best decisions for their people. Then you can have a politico. So if you say somebody's political, you kind of mean that they're trying to make everybody happy. So a politico very successfully balances those 2 roles. I would say that where public opinion is really intense, they might behave like a delegate. And when maybe it's an issue that doesn't have as much impact on their people, they behave more like a trustee. So it's just somebody who can kind of look at both of those perspectives. Is that good? Okay. Question 4. Explain what an incumbent is and why they're more likely to win elections. This is incredibly powerful. So the incumbent is the person in office who is seeking to be reelected. We do not have congressional term limits. So a person can run for the House of Representatives over and over and over, for the Senate over and over and over. The longest serving person I know in the Senate, had he not died, he was in his 9th term. That means, you guys, he would have been in the Senate for 64 years. So I think about, that was Robert Byrd, and he was from Virginia. So when you think about, well, what were the things that Robert Byrd did to continue to get himself reelected over and over again? Well, one of the things he did is he very openly engaged in the practice of pork barrel spending. He had no qualms about doing whatever he could to secure federal dollars for the people of Virginia. There's so much money that has been spent in Virginia, probably also because of its proximity to D.C., but there's so many federal dollars that went into Virginia, and Byrd could take credit for that. So sometimes we refer to that as credit claiming, where they've done something and then they can come back to their constituents and say, hey, look what I did for you. Casework is also a huge thing. Remember that casework is when a member of Congress, or really their staff, does things to help their constituents. So they smooth over bureaucratic red tape. Let's say that you are trying to get your passport, and for whatever reason there's a document that's missing that you need to get your passport. And you're trying to work with the Department of State, and you're having all kinds of issues, and the bureaucrat, they won't comply. It's like, sorry, just enforcing the rules. The congressman's office sometimes can help. It doesn't mean that they're like bending the rules or breaking the rules. It just means that they're using their connection to help their constituents. Incumbents get reelected because they have name recognition. We vote based on name recognition. I know that that sounds crazy, but I've shown you guys the ballots. Ballots are super long, so when you look at it, sometimes you can kind of panic, and if you see a name that you recognize, that you've seen on signs all over town, you're more likely to vote for them. Remember that I told you our congressmen have something called franking privilege? I'm going to show you actually what that looks like. I showed my 3A class today, but okay, so Sam Johnson is our congressman, right? And this is, go to my camera. This is something I got at my house. Oh, there's my address. Okay. So if you think, right here, instead of a stamp, there's Sam Johnson's signature. Now, obviously, it's just printed. It's not his real signature. This was sent not as campaign materials. This was sent as educational. So here's his letter telling us what he's been doing through 2015. Here's a piece of legislation that I helped with. Here are some events where I can help people who are likely to vote. And then if you need any help with anything. This was incredibly powerful because remember, this is being sent to all of his constituents. His challenger doesn't get to do that because his challenger doesn't have free mail. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but that's it's expensive to send out this kind of thing. He had to pay for his office had to pay for this, but this gets sent out for free. And remember that old people are much more likely to vote, and so they're going to pay attention to this sort of thing. There may come a time where franking privilege isn't that important, but I think right now, I still think that a lot of people, not all old people have converted to electronic communication. You know, I mean, and this, I mean, look, I'm not old, and I've paid attention to it. I got it, right? So obviously some people look at their mail, so well, you might think I'm old, but we're not going to say it. The other thing in terms of incumbency is that PACs are more likely to donate to incumbents. So their campaign donations are greater. Why are PACs more likely to donate to incumbents? Because they're more likely to win. So it's this vicious cycle. It is easier to be a challenger in the Senate than it is in the House because the Senate is more prestigious, and so sometimes you'll draw Senate challengers who are people that are, say, from the corporate world who have a real big name for themselves. I mean, like, okay, if you think about Donald Trump, he was a very unlikely presidential candidate with his lack of governmental experience. Had he done the same thing and run for the Senate versus the House, his chances would probably actually have been greater in the Senate, just because he probably wouldn't have wanted to run for the House because the House really just isn't considered as prestigious. Okay, so we already talked about that then, what advantages they have in the election process. What factors contribute to incumbency defeat? So on that one, I think if there's a scandal, that can definitely be a problem. I mean, I can give you some examples if you want, but sometimes there's been something, some kind of scandal that has gotten a lot of media attention. There are times when a congressman or a senator has openly supported some kind of unpopular legislation, or they've gotten tied to a previous presidential candidate. Remember, we learned about presidential coattails. So if let's go forward to 2018. If Donald Trump's popularity is high, then Republicans who can associate themselves with Donald Trump can, say, like, ride on his coattails. If Donald Trump's popularity is low, and we have other members of the Congress then who are closely tied to Trump, that impact, it's going to be the negative. It's going to be the opposite. And so that's definitely something that can hurt an incumbent. It seems to me that in midterm elections that incumbents tend to suffer a little bit more if they're of the president's party. Number 7, explain the impeachment process. Impeachment is 2 steps. The word impeachment means indictment. If you are going to remove a president from office, that is a really big deal. That's not something that our framers took lightly. So impeachment is that the House of Representatives has an opportunity to have the president or a federal judge, they can be impeached as well, come before them, and they basically conduct a hearing where they look at the evidence. And they get to ask all kinds of questions, and it looks like a trial, but it's not a trial. It's an impeachment process. At the end of it, if they say, yes, we're impeaching you, that means that the Senate now gets to conduct a trial. And the Senate's trial is going to basically go back through all the evidence, and then they can decide what your consequence is going to be. Are you guilty? Are you innocent? And as a result, what are we going to do about that? It's not a criminal trial. It's a trial to assess what your punishment is as a public official. They could remove you from office. They can do what's called censure. And censure to me is like public shaming. It's like you did a really bad thing. So that's what happened to Bill Clinton. He was censured, which they said you have embarrassed the office of the presidency. You basically lied under oath, which is not befitting your office. But we don't think that what you did was grave enough to actually remove you from office. So the House has the ability to impeach because they're based on population. And that's kind of like the people having an opportunity to really question the president. The Senate has the ability to potentially remove somebody from office because, remember, they're supposed to be less about public opinion. They're supposed to be a little bit more removed, kind of a step back from public opinion. So it's their chance to go to be just a little bit more deliberate than maybe the House would have been. Number 8, contrast the House and Senate in terms of framers' intent, powers, rules, traditions. Okay, I could go through this for a long time, so I'm just going to, because there's so many things, hopefully you guys made that list when we went through the Congress stations where I had you sort out the different cards. So let me think about, a few things that I can tell you. In the House, we serve a 2-year term on purpose. The Federalist Papers say that in the House, they should be on constant recollection to the people. They should know that we are where they get their job. And so they truly should be the most reflective of public opinion. When the Constitution was written, that was the only part we even directly got to vote for. I mean, that was it. Everything else was chosen differently. In the House of Representatives, you have to be at least 25 years old. You have to have been a resident of the state you live in for at least 7 years. And those are the only constitutional qualifications. In terms of specific powers, they are the ones that will originate the appropriations process. So remember, no taxation without representation. So the whole idea of how we're going to tax people and how we're going to spend their money, that has to start in the House of Representatives. That doesn't mean that the Senate won't touch it. The Senate will. But it means it starts in the House. And so typically, members of the House of Representatives that kind of make a name for themselves, they do that because of the budget process. So our current speaker, Paul Ryan, he was on the Appropriations Committee. And he was the one that's really how he distinguished himself in the House versus being in the Senate, which would have been more prestigious. In the House of Representatives, they will choose the president if the Electoral College doesn't produce a winner. So again, because they're based on population, so they're kind of more about the people. Their rules, so as a result of their structure, their rules are more strict. You can only talk for so long. You can only talk so often. They kind of have a more antagonistic culture. I don't know if you get what I mean by that. They're more likely to kind of, I'm not going to say go after each other, but I find that their comments on the floor are a little bit more biting sometimes. And that probably is just because they don't have as long. You got to really make your point and get going. In terms of their processes, remember the one thing that's really unique about them is they have a rules committee, which the Senate does not. I think that seniority definitely plays a role in the House. A lot of it depends on the speaker. Is the speaker going to reward seniority, or is he or she going to reward loyalty? So we've had speakers in the past